Greetings, one and all. It's a pleasure to see you virtually, and welcome to this session, which is going to focus on innovation and partnerships with a particular focus on vaccines. The last session, Rob Grenfell from the CSIRO was acknowledging his particular passion for vaccines, and I suspect in our audience there'll be a number of people who have that passion, and certainly a passion for all things biomedical. I think populates our panel here today. It's my particular pleasure to welcome firstly my very good friend and colleague Victor Zhao from the United States. Welcome, Victor. It's terrific to see you. For those who have not had the pleasure of knowing and working with Victor, he's the president of the US National Academy of Medicine. We've also got joining us today John Crowthers, who's the Australia New Zealand Regional Director for Abbott Diagnostics. And we also have Dean Moss from the University of Queensland, but particularly he's the CEO of UniQuest. So vaccines, the subject that is on everybody's lips at the moment. We are, as we all know, in the middle of a global pandemic. And whilst we've all no doubt read, some of us more historically, but some of us more recently, books in relation to the experience of the world when it came to Spanish flu, the reality is every day we are writing history. We are actually creating new precedents, and we're breaking through new frontiers. And that is most certainly the case in relation to innovation, the creation of new partnerships, specifically in the vaccine space. We've got today available to us a toolkit in terms of science and innovation unprecedented in human history. But of course, bringing this pandemic to a conclusion isn't just a matter of science and technology. It's also a question of global challenges in global relations, nationalism, the challenge of information, and particularly asymmetry and misinformation. It's a challenge for policy, for regulators, of course, just good old human beings. How do we deal with the situation that faces us? How do we run our lives? How do we keep our friends and our family members safe? And importantly, how do we not lose hope? And vaccines are crucial as part of this challenge. And particularly, I know that around the world, people are thinking very much and hoping very much for a very rapid rollout of vaccines. And I think much as we've seen global populations develop facility with language hitherto the province of epidemiologists and public health nerds, such as flattening the curve and the R0, I'm expecting fairly shortly people to become quite sophisticated in their use of language around vaccine efficacy, correlates of protection, and the things that we know will determine how effective this innovation is going to be. CEPI, the board that I'm proud to chair, we worry about speed, we worry about access, and we worry about safety. Access and equity are crucial if we're going to bring this pandemic to a conclusion. So let's go to our very distinguished and capable panel here this morning. This morning, I should say, on Australian time. For others, it's the evening. And I think for those of us who are used to being zombies around the world, we're all used to living in a 24/7, quite literally, world. So wherever you are, whatever time of day it is, let's go to our panel. So innovation, partnership, and vaccines. Firstly, how is it we're going with disrupting what it is has been our traditional development pathway? And for those of you who know these things intimately, you'll know that the fastest we've ever managed to achieve with the development of a vaccine is 4 years. CEPI's ambition has been to get something literally into the arms of people in 18 months. And I have to say, even 18 months seems like a very long time. But you will have all seen the press releases issued by a number of companies recently, suggesting that we have good hope, I believe, of getting an efficacious and safe vaccine. But Dean, let me start with you. What is what we're seeing now in terms of disruption? How do you think the world has moved forward in terms of our traditional approach to the development of vaccines and other relevant products in relation to COVID-19? What do we know now? What are we doing?
Well, thanks very much, Jane. Our background was we commercialised the world's first cancer vaccine, which was in Fraser-Millet and Zoo Gardasil. So we partnered with CSL, and that was a 15-year journey from the science and first filing our patents through to FDA approval of that vaccine. So I wind the clock forward from that event to the university's partnership with CEPI and the program of work that you've very wonderfully funded with us to produce a vaccine candidate that can enter a phase 1 clinical trial within 16 weeks of being provided with a viral sequence. And that was viral sequence X in the original CEPI plan. We're only halfway through the period of funding when you activated that live. So we met that challenge. So 16 weeks to go to material that could go into a phase 1 is rapid. And how did we do that? We disrupted the way that we would normally process things in vaccine development by going straight ahead to manufacturing product available to support large-scale animal challenge studies, tox studies, and clinical studies at the same time as we were doing the vaccine development. So we pulled forward the whole downstream process development and scale-up manufacture before we had generated data in animal studies. You would not do that. So you would have done a sequential process, and we went parallel and put the capital at risk. And the scale of doing this is 95 agreements within 6 months to get us into the clinic. And that's just, as I say, from the 15-year history in Gardasil, we've taken years off this program, still ensuring that we've got a safe and efficacious product to go into clinical studies.
That's fantastic. And I think everybody is wishing researchers in this domain well. We know that there are literally hundreds of groups working on vaccine candidates around the world. But of course, it's not just vaccines where there's a lot of work going on. And the reality is that the ecosystem that we occupy needs more than vaccines. It needs diagnostics, it needs therapeutics. So John Crowthers, can I come to you? What is the role of testing and other products that we need in this environment, and how important are partnerships to these developments and then to roll out?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Look, it's critical. I think what we've seen, if I was to look at it in two phases, the initial phase of COVID with the active disease diagnosis, and we heard from Minister Hunt before around, 8 million tests have been done here in Australia in a really rapid response to be able to detect, manage and control what's going on here locally. There's an exceptional example of a combination of diagnostic organisations bringing tests to market at scale, and the ability for the pathology industry, both public and private, to respond and provide, not just the nasopharyngeal swab that we see every day in the news, but actually the tests that sit behind it, the interpretation and management of that information to help with tracing and control. As we move into vaccines, I think it's another interesting question that needs to be asked, because it's all about efficacy and durability. And I think there's a real opportunity to understand those two factors. Well, I'd actually say the only way to know that going forward will be through a partnership with pathology and diagnostic companies like Abbott in ensuring that we're able to develop the right tests to look at the response, the immune response that we get from vaccines, to understand by different people, by different age demographic, as well as their underlying other health issues. That is only going to come from the right tests marrying up with the right vaccines. And the vaccine candidates are different for the right reasons. And I think there's this opportunity to really look at paralleling diagnostics with vaccines to ensure we're able to measure, get the right science to understand the response, the efficacy, durability over the coming period of time, and then obviously preparation going forward.
Thank you for that. Victor Zhao, you have been at the absolute epicenter both of global innovation in terms of the mechanisms we use, but in your role in the United States as a calm and a clear voice as part of what I think has been a particular challenge to one of our great neighbours and colleagues and allies. Can you talk to us about how you think the world is going to face up to some of the big challenges as we do start to get vaccines available, thinking about the challenge of multilateralism and continuing to encourage it, thinking about how we allocate those vaccines, but also thinking about how we reassure individuals in our populations who are being bombarded with information, misinformation about vaccines. So can we feel positive, Victor? How do we go forward from here?
Well, you've asked me a loaded question, my good friend. It'll take me a while to answer all the questions. But let me first say, Jane, commend you on your role as chair of CEPI. In fact, I serve on the interim board with you, and CEPI has done so much in enabling innovation, as Dean said. In fact, echoing what Dean said, I think, first of all, it's technology platform that's made a huge difference. Once you get the sequence, you're ready to make a vaccine candidate, whether using mRNA or other technology. Then you can get into human. And Dean kind of emphasized the end-to-end issue, which is from research, development, to risk manufacturing, before you even know whether it works or not, to procurement, and then, of course, to access to vaccine. And this is where the multilateralism come in, because the big concern is vaccine nationalism, where countries are securing doses for their own citizen through pre-purchase agreements. So right now, about 10% of the world's population have cornered more than 50% of the promised doses by making these pre-purchase agreements. So at the beginning of this pandemic, there's no framework globally that can bring end-to-end, making sure that we can assure equity access to vaccine everywhere. There's no multilateralism. And this is where I think you and myself and others have been very active in playing this role through, first of all, the Global Pandemic Monitoring Board, which I serve. We call for $8 billion to inject the money into vaccine development, and drugs and therapeutics as well, that triggered a global pledge event that brought in $18 billion. And then the formation of access to COVID-19 tools, the ACT Accelerator, with which CEPI is part of this, along with Gavi, along with Bill and Melinda Gates, Global Fund, WHO. So all the players came together to form a multilateral mechanism for equitable access to vaccines, diagnostic therapeutics. That's the key. As far as vaccines concerned, this COVAX, which is the vaccine pillar for ACT Accelerator, where you play a very important role, has brought together this end-to-end process and brought together many countries, 186 countries, 92 are low-income countries, 94 are self-financed high-income countries, together to purchase and actually secure vaccine doses for the global good. So this is the good news. It's happening. Its goal is to have 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. And of course, we're not quite there yet, but we're a long way now from where we started, and the news is quite good. So that being said, your question is, what happens when you have vaccines available? Will people take it? There indeed is a big hesitation, what we call vaccine hesitancy, and they are a combination of people who are anti-vaxxers, people who are special populations that just don't trust the government because they've been exploited over years. The United States communities of color, the Tuskegee study, and then of course more recently, people just don't trust the way the government is handling the COVID-19. The issue is to be transparent. The issue is to make all the processes known, to hold high standards, and to keep those standards away from political interference. So I would say that misinformation has to be countered by a campaign of trustfulness in vaccine, the transparency of process, and the ability to get people to understand what it takes. Thank you.
I think those are very wise words, Victor. I mean, the reality is that so often now people don't know how to find trusted, safe, secure, and reliable information. So we're facing a world where we've moved at unprecedented speed, and I think the program in the United States is called Warp Speed, literally. Yes. Of course, everyone is wishing researchers, people doing these trials, all good speed in order to hasten the bringing to the end of the acute phase of this pandemic. But I wonder whether we should even now be thinking about what lessons we're learning from these experiences. So let me go back to you, Dean. You talked about the 16 weeks from the release of the the viral sequence through to creating a candidate. We still, here we are now, about 12 months, I think, since we first saw those unusual cases of viral pneumonia in Wuhan in China. And we have still got some distance to go before our ambition of actually having vaccine rolled out around the world is realised. Where will we go next time? And I think it's important to emphasise, people keep using terms like once in a 100-year event. We know that the prospect of there being some other zoonotic event is reasonably high. And so none of us take comfort from this notion of once in 100 years, people living far more densely than they did. So Dean, for the future, if we have to do this again in the near term, what should we change? How can we even now speed up what it is we're learning from this experience?
Well, Jane, to your point, I think one of the things is making sure that we continue, globally to invest in quality science. So without platform technologies available, one can't deploy as rapidly as we have done in this. I mean, we talk about ours in a 16-week timeframe, but the actual research was ongoing from 2012. And we, have had that funded through that period and really tried to bolster a team with a critical mass that understood the need to produce vaccines against viral pathogens. So if I look at, West Nile and chikungunya and, dengue, there have been many of the vector-borne diseases that we don't have effective vaccines for. So, the team was not about particularly a COVID vaccine. They had some experience working on MERS. That was in the program of work, pandemic flu, concept of a universal flu vaccine. And it reminds me of the orphan drug story and small molecule drug discovery of who's going to pick these vaccines up at the other side. And as the commercial arm for the University of Queensland, we look at it and say, well, we need to invest in the platform because there will be applications for this in paying and non-paying markets. And I think that's the approach, is to always have the core science that we do here, whether it be nucleic acid or protein subunit or a new modality or a new way of adjuvanting or a new way to deliver. We have a lot in the delivery space with a microarray patch technology that we've commercialised. And I think by investing in that globally, we have a repository of scientific endeavour that can respond to these challenges. And I would note that 2 of the leading vaccines in this space have come from academic institutions. It's not always come out of biotech pharma.
And Dean, I think I shall hire you because you've just made the case for continued investment in cities. So your contract will be coming fairly shortly. Thank you. John McGrathers, let me just ask you, we are learning new ways of working now, and there is this tension, isn't there, between the capital that you have to invest in technology, where you really, if you're in a commercial environment, you have to be confident you're going to get a return, versus the just-in-case world. So if you think about, we've gone from really a just-in-time to a just-in-case world. How do you think we can find better partnerships to keep developing this broader range of technologies so we are ready for all manner of circumstances? Do you foresee that we need to see some change in that broader ecosystem?
Yeah, I do. And I spoke earlier around, with the vaccines coming out and the need for looking at, immune response and measuring that effectively through pathology networks that we've got. We're not doing that parallel development of the right antibody test necessary to match the vaccine. So there's an example of maybe the discussions that need to be had earlier on in that phase to ensure, as these elements come out, we were running in parallel, not chasing one after the other. So I think there's some opportunity to enhance that from a research through to diagnostics through to other parts of the healthcare ecosystem to enable that more effectively than where we are today. So I think there's opportunity to enable that to enhance our response times, because it is all about that. And we ultimately want to know the information yesterday. We want it based on good science, and therefore how we allow ourselves to communicate across the different areas in an appropriately transparent way. Government can help in that situation, I think, to help convene those types of environments to enable that to occur and put us in the best place possible to be able to achieve it. And I think what we've seen over this year is an incredible response. And now I think we need to prepare for that next phase of what's to come with COVID-19, and then the next preparation around the next pandemic that will, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So like viral surveillance programs, which we're very invested in from an Abbott point of view, making sure that we understand, share that, understand mutations, and we're at the forefront of what's going on, responding in parallel on treatment and vaccines to be able to give us every chance possible not to have to go through what we're going through at the moment again.
Yes, I think there'd be a hearty cheer for that sentiment for all the people watching today. Victor, let me come back to you. You and I have been engaged actually over a good number of years in various endeavours in relation to global public health. We both, I think, hope that we're making a bit of a difference. You're doing it in the epicentre of the current outbreak and some of the challenges in the United States. And we watch every day and feel great concern for our friends, family and colleagues living in the US. But could you talk to us a little bit about what you think will be the lessons coming from this current experience? And I mean, I think one of the challenges for all of us is to look at our architecture and ask ourselves, has it been fit for purpose? What changes should we make? Because I think the world, when we get through this process, will turn around. I mean, we know in time they will forget. It's a bit like childbirth, it kind of fades. But there will be a period where people will ask, why did this happen? How can we prevent it happening again? Will we be ready next time? And you've had huge visibility of everything that's gone on. Can you talk to us about what you think the questions should be, firstly, and then how we might go about protecting ourselves going forward, bringing together this world of science, the world of manufacturing, and then how we deploy all of those tools in a way that's equitable around the world. So there's no challenge here, Victor. How do we fix this going?
You always ask me the tough question. But let me first agree with my colleagues about investing in science. So that's without question. You know, people used to say vaccine is a market failure, but you can hardly argue it's a market failure now. But the problem is we don't have enough money to pay for all of it. And you know that. In other words, while we've invested in science, and science can measure vaccine, how do we make sure that everybody gets it? And how do you make sure everybody can afford it? This is what you said earlier about multilateralism. And, you know, so our model is mainly a donor-assisted model. We ask rich countries to pay for the poor countries. And so now there's a little bit more maybe self-interest in investing in vaccine. I think what we need to do is to have a sustainable financing mechanism and a governance mechanism, particularly during peacetime. If you look at what's happened from end to end, R&D, CEPI, risk manufacturing, Dean talked about, procurement, Gavi, and allocation. If you don't have all the pieces come together, it won't work. So you need a sustainable mechanism that's beyond donor model to a more commitment of countries towards sustaining such a mechanism. And we're working on this issue right now. Hopefully, if you look at, there's over $12 trillion of stimulus package. All we need, as you know, Accelerator is 28 billion, right? Fraction. So we need to create a sustainable mechanism. But I think the lessons learned are the following. The human dimensions is really important. Leadership really counts. When you have the right country leadership, it matters a lot in terms of using science-based decision. So, and then citizenship counts. Every citizen has a responsibility to protect each other and protect themselves, because an outbreak anywhere is outbreak everywhere. So that's second thing, human dimension. Then, of course, there's the whole issue of mobilizing the resources and reforming, in fact, the way we do things. So there's a good amount of lessons learned, too many to count. And I think, as you know, in fact, the independent panel, which, in fact, Helen Clark co-chairs, is examining these questions. I'm on the GPMB. We're examining some of these questions as well. But I do think these are very essential issues, which is leadership, citizenship, science matters, early decision. I think the indices of preparedness is not very valid, because if you look at the Global Security Index, US ranks #1 in preparedness. We're performing the worst, right? So as I said, strategy counts, and then an issue of multilateralism, getting solidarity, everybody working together, and create a sustainable financing governance structure.
And Victor, it seems to me that that is the perfect point on which we will draw this panel to a conclusion. The truth of the matter is we are only as strong as each other in this particular context. And even if it's the good old-fashioned public health things that we think about, non-pharmaceutical intervention and mask wearing where mandated and where recommended, we have lots of work to do going forward. And so it's my particular pleasure to thank, because I know they're all so busy, to thank Dean Moss, the CEO of UniQuest, working very hard up there in Queensland on one of these candidates. John Crowthers from Abbott Diagnostics, and my very good friend and colleague and collaborator over some period, Victor Zhao, the president of the US National Academy of Medicine. So let me thank you all panelists for being so frank and having such important insights. And thank you to all of our viewers. We'll bring this session to a conclusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.